So, I assume all of you have heard of Audible.com before. I mean, nowadays, who hasn't, right? I feel like a while back ago, maybe like last year, a bunch of YouTubers, like literally all of the YouTubers, were getting sponsorships from this same audiobook company. Personally, I'm more of a physical, like, tactile book type of gal, or so I thought. Falling under the temptation of getting a free book from Audible.com, I decided to take one of these YouTubers up on their offer, and I downloaded a free audiobook from Audible.com. My thoughts? I kind of loved it, actually, to my surprise. I would listen to my downloaded audiobook to and from school in the car, and I honestly felt so productive. Like, at that time, I downloaded a US history book because I'd been preparing for the APUSH AP exam at the time. And I felt like I was learning so much, like in the car drives, just because instead of listening to like the same old Spotify playlist I always listen to, I was learning about history. But eventually I got to wondering, how productive was I actually being by listening to an audiobook? How much was my brain actually grasping the information that I was listening to on the audiobook, as opposed to, normally reading out of a textbook and absorbing the information that way? Eventually, I conjured up this final question. Can listening to an audiobook truly compare to reading a hard copy of that same book? Interested to find the answer to this question myself, I did a little bit of research. And that is why we are here together today, I guess. So, without further ado, let's answer the question. Is listening to an audiobook comparable to reading a material, tangible book? So, to start off my research, I decided to look up on the internet some people's thoughts on the perks of listening to audiobooks. I was simply looking for a starting point just to understand the surface of the appeal of services such as Audible.com. I stumbled upon the website Asian Efficiency to find the article 7 Reasons Why You Should Listen to Audiobooks, to hear of writer Tan Pham's thoughts on the matter. In his article, the appeals he explained that most piqued my interest included effectiveness, convenience, and faster, more efficient learning. By effectiveness, Pham was referring to how some hard copy books are just really dang boring to get through, and by substituting reading the book and falling asleep while doing so with downloading the audio version of it and staying engaged. This part made a lot of sense to me because sometimes when I was preparing for the APUSH exam and I was reading the big, thick Eric Foner textbook, I would kind of fall asleep to reading it because it was just not engaging enough for me, and by falling asleep I definitely wasn't learning anything. That may have been because it was like 8 o'clock at night and I was cramming for a test or for the exam and I just wasn't into it. But even so, if I had an audio version of it, maybe that would have helped me stay more engaged. The next point Pham touched on was the point of convenience, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I mean, you can have audiobooks like on your cell phone, you can listen to them in the car, you can listen to it on your iPod Touch if you so choose to, and if you still have one. This, I can attest for, is very, very true. I mean, they're just so dang convenient. The last point of Pham's that piqued my interest was the one that intrigued me the most. This was his point on the learning efficiency audiobooks provided. Of course, it is known that when you're listening to an audiobook, you can adjust the reading speed when you're listening to it. So, of course, that explains the efficiency component of this definition, because you can simply just get through material faster. However, how much information from listening to audiobooks is actually retained in the brain? David Daniel of James Madison University conducted an experiment in 2010 to test this theory, the theory that audio learning by way of podcast was comparable to visual learning by way of reading a physical book. His findings? The students that solely listened to the podcast lessons performed worse on the comprehension quiz than the students who read the same lesson in text. Daniel went on to explain that the podcast group did more than a little worse on that quiz, receiving grades that differed from the visual learning group by, on average, 4 letter grades. Eek. But why is this? Daniel explained that these results were mostly due to the fact that for the majority of students, solely learning via audio is not the norm. Therefore, they are not used to having to listen more critically. Also, you can't be an active reader. Like, you can't highlight or underline or annotate when going through an audiobook because it isn't a tangible book. Even though these results are a little oof, audiobooks still have some strengths. For those that are blind or visually impaired, audiobooks are a big blessing to those who still want to enjoy their most beloved books. Also, for those who have reading disabilities like dyslexia, audiobooks paired with the actual physical book can be a great learning tool and can aid in the development of more advanced reading skills in the future. In short, if we solely look at results in informational absorption of the brain, listening to an audiobook cannot compare to reading a hard copy of that same book. When reading a physical, tangible book, the brain will absorb the information it receives, as shown in David Daniels' experiment. And even though audiobooks aid in those with impairments, for the average student, listening to audio recordings just won't cut it in the academic environment. Active reading with annotating and underlining and highlighting, that is the better way to absorb material. If you're reading for leisure, then certainly go for it. Download an audiobook off Audible, why not? But in an academic sense, audiobooks cannot compare to reading a material, tangible book. Alrighty, that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening to my video, and please have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Got it, Chief.